the polls are reflecting how we're all feeling about Albanese, that voters are sick of this weak Prime Minister after just one term. It's not that he's quintessentially a bad person. He's just an ineffective, insipid Prime Minister who hasn't shown leadership at a time our country desperately needs it. This is very personal to Albanese. Newspoll today shows that the majority of voters don't believe his government deserves to be re-elected. His approval rating is at a record low of 37%, and his net negative approval rating is at the lowest since he became leader, minus 21%. Labor's primary vote at an equal record low of 31%, while the Coalition's primary at 38%. On a two-party preferred basis, it's sitting at 51 to 49, the Coalition's way. Now, the Oz reports that this is still half the size of the swing the Coalition needs to win majority government, and this means, according to the polls, which aren't always right, that at the moment a hung parliament is the most likely outcome. But don't forget, the US election, again, the polls are predicting very close outcome between Trump and Kamala Harris, and it ended up being a landslide for Trump. In this case, the overall sentiment is clear. 53% of voters said it was time for a change of government, and this includes in Queensland, Victoria and New South Wales. And despite Labor trying to run their tired campaign claiming that women don't like Peter Dutton, well, the figures show that there was little difference among gender lines on the question of whether there should be a change of government. And this is precisely why Albanese is desperate for a rate cut tomorrow. It's why Labor MPs have been openly pressuring the RBA, despite the fact it's meant to be independent, and despite the fact many economists are worried that the RBA will cave into populist pressure in a way that sets back the fight against inflation. Labor MPs, though, showed none of that concern today, publicly mounting the case for a cut ahead of tomorrow's meeting.
They've tightened their budgets, they've made sacrifices, and because of that, we've got inflation down. And I reckon that they deserve some rate relief.
I want to cut, Kieran. I absolutely want to cut. My job is to stand up for my community. And we need a cut.
Free TAFE, cheaper childcare, cheaper medicines, more bulk billing.
Before the election.
Well, we all would. We're all, you know, any of us who've got a mortgage would like one, that's for sure.
Many economists argue that while headline inflation is now within the RBA's 2 to 3% target, this is, as you know, because it's been artificially lowered by Labor's energy subsidies. And the economists say this is only temporary, and headline inflation is expected to rise back above target once the subsidies stop. Underlying inflation still remains above 3%. Former Treasury Assistant Secretary David Pearl wrote a sharp and quite brilliant piece in The Australian today, where he argues that if the RBA cuts rates prematurely, and they need to be later corrected, then our inflation problem will be worse and the credibility of the RBA in tatters. He writes, "This ugly and sustained public pressure put Bullock in an extraordinarily difficult position. To use one of her favourite phrases, she's had to tread a narrow path, balancing loyalty to her staff and policy principles on the one hand, and the need to avoid a public split with the Treasurer on the other." He says at the RBA board meeting, Bullock is likely to face her moment of truth. Will she do the right thing for the Australian people or adopt the line of least political resistance? And Warren Hogan, who will be here on the show tomorrow night after we know the outcome of the rates decision, well, he says the RBA definitely shouldn't cut rates. He says our economy isn't ready for it and the case for it is weak.
I think the problem for the market is the market's perceiving, and many economists, that there is a political interference here, that the pressure's on. And when I say it, I'm not saying that the government's sitting there telling the RBA what to do, But we know there's a lot of people in there telling them what to do who are friends of the government.
So this rates decision will be a test for the RBA and its independence. It will be a test for Michelle Bullock and her ability to withstand pressure from Jim Chalmers' close friend, the Treasury Secretary Stephen Kennedy. He has a seat on the board, and you imagine he'd be mounting the case for a rate cut very strongly. Of course, a cut will be celebrated by families doing it tough who haven't had mortgage relief since November 2020. But if the RBA doesn't withstand the political meddling and succumbs to the pressure, then the board has to be very careful that it doesn't contribute to the inflation crisis we've all been battling.